Hey everybody, HomeSliceHenry here, and in today's video, I'm going to be showcasing one of the most powerful core breakers to this new Open Grid League meta, and that is SHADOW MAGNEZONE. There are so many teams built around the very popular and very centralizing core of Wigglytuff plus Jellicent, and SHADOW MAGNEZONE absolutely destroys both of those Pokemon. Additionally, nerfs to Stunfisk, Marowak, and Gastrodon, which were the popular ground types from before, mean that it just ends up having a lot more favorable matchups than it did in previous seasons. I ran it with a Feraligatr, Azumarill backline, and went 17-3 across 4 sets. So without further ado, let's hop into the matches, and in Game 1 we're off to an incredibly good start, leading SHADOW MAGNEZONE into Alolan Ninetales. And would you look at that, the Ninetales is not switching out because they are core broken by the Magnezone. I'm expecting my opponent will catch the Mirror Shot, so I end up firing off the Wild Charge. My opponent actually doesn't go for a catch, they just stay in and they put up the shield, but now I can save switch into Feraligatr. I have 3 strong answers to Alolan Ninetales, so regardless of where it ends up, I'm going to be in a pretty good spot. My opponent does full send the Dazzling Gleam. I don't want them to bank a Weather Ball and pivot out, so I'm just going to fire off the Hydro Cannon and secure the knockout. My opponent sends in Jellicent, thinking that they do wall my energy, but my Feraligatr is on Crunch. Originally, this was from helping my Gym Breakers teammates practice for matchups, but Crunch actually ended up being pretty nice across these sets, as a lot of people brought Jellicent into Feraligatr, and Feraligatr was able to very effectively punish. Feraligatr lands a Crunch into a devastating farm down, and in the back is Shadow Annihilate. At this point, this game is over. I don't even know if I'm gonna need Azumarill in this game. Hydro Cannon after Hydro Cannon crash into the Annihilate. Annihilate is gonna make the Rage Fist, but I've decided that I'm just not gonna show them my third. So I'm able to get the catch back onto the Magnezone, and now I can just send in Feraligatr, Shadow Claws down, and that is a good game. Throughout the course of today's battles, there were so many games where I would pick up a winning lead, and they would just stay in because they were so core broken by the Magnezone. Like this trainer, they lead Fearow into Magnezone. This is a dreadful lead. They try and CMP tie the Magnezone, but I'm just going to farm them down. I'm going to exit basically at full HP and with 5 volt switches of energy, and they just immediately resign the match. I assume it was something like Wigglytuff plus Jellicent in the back. However, I do want to showcase how I dealt with some bad leads. So I lead SHADOW MAGNEZONE into Annihilate. This matchup is actually way better for Feraligatr now that Annihilate is on low kick. They land the Rage Fist and send in Licky Licky. Now this is not amazing for Feraligatr. Feraligatr already doesn't have a strong matchup into the Licky Licky. I'm running the non-Shadow Feraligatr, and here, I actually just want my opponent to fire off energy early, so I don't throw the Hydro Cannon to entice them to throw very quickly. Because all I want is a massive farm down with this SHADOW MAGNEZONE. My opponent will fire off the Shadow Ball, but by full sending, guess what? They're not getting to a second Shadow Ball. I now have so much energy on my Magnezone that they can't even afford to bring in the Annihilate. They bring in the Drapion. That was honestly a terrible bait by me because the Drapion was always going to be no shield in there. They send back in Annihilate, but I just have so much energy on this Magnezone. Mirror Shot after Mirror Shot. I'm building up to the Wild Charge to pressure them into shielding, and now that they're debuffed, I can send in Azumarill, and there's just nothing that this poor Annihilate can do. So despite the fact that we had a pretty terrible lead, Magnezone energy is just so insanely flexible. I was able to get the full volt switch down and just completely destroy their team. My opponent sends in the Drapion, but the damage is already done. This play rough is going to set up a perfect bubble farm down. Drapion will leave with a parting gift, but unfortunately, Drapion's charge attacks are walled by Azumarill. So we tank the Aqua Tail, no problem. In comes Annihilate, and we're going to finish the game off with the Magnezone. I'm going to shield, Volt Switch goes through, and even with bad leads, this team was just so incredibly consistent. Speaking of bad leads, we have SHADOW MAGNEZONE into Malamar. You may notice my SHADOW MAGNEZONE is atrociously bad IVs. I just don't have a better one. Well, at least I didn't until, I believe it was 2 nights ago, when I ended up doing my Midnight Rocket Balloon, and I got a Shadow Shiny Magnezone that's actually pretty good PvP IVs. Unfortunately, that still has frustration, so I'm going to have to wait for the next frustration event to be able to TM it away, but I will eventually have a replacement Magnezone. Even though throwing the Wild Charge is tempting in this matchup, I know that I should just be able to go straight Mirror Shot. So I go straight Mirror Shot, I fully farm them down, and I exit with a little bit of residual energy. My opponent sends in Corviknight, so if they're bringing this in, they are very, very weak. I farm up to the Wild Charge, bait with the Mirror Shot, and then look to pivot out, but my opponent calls the bait. So it's very clear if they're no-shielding that they have something glassy in the back that does not want to see Magnezone. They were willing to fully sacrifice the Corviknight, and the reveal, it is going to be Empoleon, and they are so weak to Magnezone in the back. Empoleon's going to have to manage their energy very carefully in this matchup, because if they end up firing off their drill pecks very quickly, then they're not going to have the residual energy they need to fight back against the Magnezone switch-in. My opponent makes a really nice play. They throw 4 in the move. Had they thrown 1 in the move, I could have just sent in the Magnezone and farmed them down, but now they have a bunch of residual energy. I send in the Magnezone. They do now have a Hydro Cannon loaded, but my Mirror Shot will force the shield. They pivot out, switching into the Corviknight, and Corviknight will fire off the Air Cutter to ensure that the Volt Switch does not land. But I have a Charge Stack loaded on Azumarill, so at this point I just don't really have a loose con. I can send in for Alligator. Alligator is more than happy to absorb energy from the Corviknight. It is only going to be an Air Cutter, and by overfarming by 2, I should put myself in a winning position, because my opponent needs to be able to farm to a point where they can have back-to-back charge attacks, and they just simply cannot do that. Empoleon will go for the Drill Peck, but this is the non-Shadow for Alligator. We're able to survive and exit with that Hydro Cannon loaded. So even with a bit of a scary lead in Malamar, once we got through the Malamar, the opponent was so weak to Electric in the back, and Magnezone again was a huge problem. We get another tough lead in the next match, and this is a Pokemon I haven't seen in ages. Shadow Magnezone into Trevenant. I save switch into Feraligatr because at the very least I do have super effective Shadow Claws. My opponent is going to respond with a Milotic, and it's very clear my opponent is just running some Spice. Now Trevenant, it does not do much in this meta, unfortunately. Time and power creep have not been kind to it, but what it does do is core break this team, so I definitely am going to have a pretty tough fight on my hands. Wrap, luckily, will not knock out the Feraligatr. I'm able to hang on, make the Hydro Cannon, and bad news for me, my opponent does not prioritize switch advantage. Instead, they take a big energy head start on the Talonflame. I send in a Azumarill. Talonflame will fire off its energy immediately. I'm expecting Brave Bird, but they only go for the fly. There's the pivot into the Trevenant, but I already have a 4-bubble head start on the Azumarill. This is the advantage that I need to try and win this game. I'm going to need Azumarill to be able to make a second Ice Beam, and for this Seed Bomb to not take the knockout. I'm not worried about the Seed Bomb. Seed Bomb is not an amazing move, and Azumarill is very, very bulky. But now it's all up to Shadow Magnezone. There's a Grass type and a Fire type. 2 typings that should do pretty well into the Magnezone. This game is going to come down to a catch from my opponent. They need to catch the Mirror Shot on a Talonflame to win the game. So I farm up, I wait the turn, in comes Talonflame, and I'm able to get the Wild Charge plus Mirror Shot double up. So even with 2 Pokemon that should counter Magnezone, Magnezone's winning anyway. I love the flexibility of this Pokemon. Now the Marowak and Gastrodon are dead. A Shadow Magnezone just absolutely slams the door on that game. We've actually got a mirror lead in the next match, Shadow Magnezone versus Shadow Magnezone. Now this is a moment where having atrociously bad Magnezone IVs will actually pay dividends for me. And that's because I'm always going to be winning charge attack priority. I do get quite lucky here. My opponent does get Mirror Shot debuffed. They're going to full send the Wild Charge, I put up the shield, and I'll CMP time my Mirror Shot to ensure that I will be able to win this matchup. Mirror Shot lands, down goes Magnezone, in comes Talonflame, I land a big Volt Switch, but unfortunately down goes Magnezone. I'm going to send in Azumarill, as Azumarill will be able to absorb the fly here, no problem. Talonflame is actually on Brave Bird, which is pretty atypical for the Shadow, and in the back, we have Feraligatr versus Feraligatr. I should be in a winning position because I am 1 off an Ice Beam on the Azumarill. They land Hydro Cannon, and I'm going to go for the Crunch. Crunch should put me in a pretty good spot here. Crunch is going to do more damage, and I actually get a bit lucky as I do get the Crunch debuff. With or without the Crunch debuff, this endgame was going to end in a win, but since I got it, I can now commit to a farm down. If I didn't get it, I would have farmed up to 9 Shadow Claws to ensure that I can knock them out with the Hydro Cannon and make a Hydro Cannon into Talonflame. Because once I get Talonflame Shield, I am 1 off the move with Azumarill. So back in comes Azumarill, we fire off the Ice Beam, and that is going to seal it. Magnezone versus Magnezone. We're able to get the win, in large part due to our very bad Magnezone IVs. Great lead in the next match, Shadow Magnezone into Shadow Galarian Weezing. My opponent safe switches into Annihilate, and I'm going to respond with Azumarill. Now this is a matchup that Annihilate does have the ability to flip. Annihilate's pacing is so incredibly fast. If my opponent does want to go down shields and make a play for switch advantage, I think I'm pretty okay with that, because I'm throwing away the Azumarill, which would be the only type advantage matchup that Galarian Weezing has into my team. So after firing off the Ice Beam and getting the shield, I'm just going to let myself get KO'd. Annihilate has ramped up so much energy to the point where Azumarill is going to fall, but this will just give such a huge farm down opportunity for the Feraligatr. So I put up the shield, I'm going to exit with a ton of energy. My opponent is going to pivot and reveal their final Pokemon as Sableye. Sableye cannot knock me out here with foul play, so I feel like I'm in a very good spot. Hydro Cannon is going to land. Sableye plays to a CMP tie that they do not win. And that CMP tie should put me in a very good spot. My opponent makes the only play that they can, which is no shield of the Sableye and throwing away all the energy. In comes Weezing, I pivot into the Magnezone. This game is somehow still not over. If my opponent can get a catch, they'll win the game. They're just over-farming a ton of energy. I fire off the Mirror Shot, and they get the catch onto Annihilate. Since they had a ton of energy, I didn't want to wait a turn. I guess what I had to do in that endgame was just over-farm and predict the catch. But unfortunately, I just went for it. I get knocked out by the Brutal Swing, and now my opponent will get the double up on Sludges, one before my move. So with the Shadow Claw Sneak, I still can't get there. I no shield, very nice catch from my opponent, and that will win them the game. We get a great lead in the next match, Shadow Magnezone into Florges. A lot of Florges are paired with Empoleon, and you know what completely core breaks that team to smithereens? Shadow Magnezone. Once they do apply a Chilling Water debuff, a Mirror Shot will not take the knockout anymore, so you do have to go for a Wild Charge, but my opponent's going to pivot out and they send in Licky Licky. This is going to hurt. Even a -1 Wild Charge absolutely destroys Licky Licky, and I'm more than happy to send in a Azumarill. Now I have an interesting choice to make. I could consider going for the full bubble farm down. I would have to go well over 100 to do so, but at the very least, I would exit one off the back-to-back Ice Beams. But I'm pretty sure that if I try that, my opponent will make it to a third Shadow Ball, and I probably wouldn't have enough HP to make it to both moves. So I just fire off the Ice Beam. Back in comes the Florges, but it's not like Florges is ever going to Fairy Wood me down. So I get to fire off Ice Beam. Ice Beam will be putting them quite low, and I'm able to get the shield. Florges farming up. They actually throw an alignment there. They could have done one more Fairy Wind, but I still have a charge stack loaded on the Magnezone. So I can bring in the Magnezone. I even over-farm and play to the CMP tie here, firing off the Mirror Shot. Mirror Shot does get shielded. That makes me think that they're weak to electric in the back, because if they had an electric resistance, they should have caught. So I send in Feraligatr, and it's a Unova Stunfisk in the back. So I think that was a misplay by my opponent. It was a pretty easy catch out of the Stunfisk. I still think they would have ended up losing the game regardless, just because I still would have had the Feraligatr, and Feraligatr has a pretty nice matchup in his Stunfisk and the one shield. But I think by not going for the catch and giving up the final shield, their fate was definitely sealed. Feraligatr knocks out the Stunfisk. Florges will get a bunch of farm, but now I can just bring in the Magnezone and take the game. So Magnezone gets that Volt Switch down, and this team stays cooking. Shadow Magnezone into Shadow Drapion in the next match. This is a pretty solid matchup for the Magnezone. Drapion does have a pacing advantage, but I have this and a Azumarill as two pretty good checks to the Drapion. Drapion goes for the crunch, they save switch into Furret, and I'm going to farm up to the Mirror Shot plus Wild Charge double up. This is a ton of pressure onto the Furret, but Furret does not blink. Furret does not put up the shield, and I'm doubling down. I'm going for a second Mirror Shot, and they call both of my baits. Oh, that is so unfortunate. I do get the Mirror Shot debuff, but man, they just did not care. They were fully fine throwing away their Furret to a Wild Charge. I send in a Azumarill that is going to be a one-turn switch-in that does allow them to make a Swift, but realistically, I just needed to try and save the Magnezone, because in the back, they have Jellicent. Jellicent is a Pokemon that I have two pretty solid answers to with the Feraligatr and with Magnezone, but the Magnezone is already so low. I took so much damage from those Sucker Punches that unfortunately, by my opponent calling two baits, I think I'm in a position where I will lose this game. It's not over yet, but it's definitely trending in a negative direction. Shadow Ball will take the knockout. In comes Feraligatr, there's the pivot, and in comes the Shadow Drapion. Shadow Drapion now has the energy for a crunch. The question is, can my opponent Poison Sting down Magnezone? This is where my bad Magnezone IVs may come back to cost me. Mirror Shot into the Drapion, gets the shield, no debuff. We get Poison Stung down, and unfortunately, this is looking like a tough game to win. I'm going to be no shielding here, as I don't want my opponent to crunch debuff me. They land the crunch, but because I no shielded a crunch, they can now go for Aqua Tails. Aqua Tail is shielded, in comes Jellicent. I know a Hydro will not knock out, and I'm forced to go for the crunch. The game all comes down to this. Are they 3 off the move or 4 off the move? I'm 4 away, in comes Drapion, and they were 3 off the move. Had I shielded the first crunch and forced them to crunch again, it would have been a CMP tie and I could have won the game, but unfortunately I did not. And even with my misplays, we still got it to within 2 turns. Hopping to the final match, we see a Core Breaker on the lead, Shadow Magnezone against Shelgon. Magnezone is so frail that even though Shelgon is Flamethrower, they can probably just spam Twisters at me because these Dragon Breaths are really adding up. So I will put up the shield. They do just go for the Twister, and I'm going to fire off yet another Mirror Shot. This Mirror Shot should be knocking out the Shelgon. Shelgon puts up the shield, and now just off of Volt Switches pretty much and 1 Mirror Shot landing, they are deep into the red HP. I don't think I can quite get a Volt Switch down, so I pivot into Feraligatr looking for a snipe. I don't get the snipe, but what I do get is a Jellicent counter swap. Baiting this out is big. My Azumarill does not want to have to deal with this, and Crunch is going to deal devastating damage. Shadow Ball is going to hurt, but I think this is 6 Shadow Claw range, and that means that Feraligatr should be able to get a devastating farm down. Feraligatr exiting with the Hydro Cannon loaded. They should have a move on the Shelgon as well, and they're going to deny all my energy with their Twister. But I'm pretty okay with this, because that means the Shelgon can no longer fire off a charge attack at me. In the back, it's going to be Empoleon, and they are just getting melted by these Volt Switches. My goodness. I Mirror Shot, that gets the shield, and now I can pivot into Azumarill. And Azumarill is just an absolute nightmare for Empoleon to deal with if Empoleon has taken any kind of damage. They can throw Drill Peck after Drill Peck, and Azumarill just simply will not care, and each bubble that lands gets them closer and closer to Play Rough range. So, I fire off the Play Rough. They have no Protect Shields remaining. This is guaranteed to land. Play Rough lands. They make a final Drill Peck, but it's just too little too late. Azumarill is too bulky. The Drill Peck lands. In comes Shelgon just to get bubbled down. Opponent sees the writing on the wall and concedes the match. All in all, with this team across 20 battles in 4 sets, I went 17-3. So this team performed amazingly well. I really felt like Shadow Magnezone just on the lead put me at such a team comp advantage just right off the bat in the vast majority of games. I did want to try and feature quite a few games where I ended up losing the lead as well to demonstrate how this team can fight back, even with some weird stuff like the Trevenant lead that we were still able to beat because Azumarill is just simply too bulky. Now, Palasha was running a version of this team that had Shadow Sableye over Feraligatr. I think Shadow Sableye is a very cool Pokemon. However, considering the amount of shields that I like to invest in Shadow Magnezone, I think having something that has a little bit more bulk ends up making the team slightly a bit easier to use. And that's where the regular Feraligatr ended up being very clutch. While Crunch was just a moveset that was on my Feraligatr from doing Gym Breakers practice, I ended up feeling that Crunch was a net positive for the team. I think there was one game that didn't end up making the video where I thought I lost because I didn't have Ice Beam because there was a Shadow Torterra, but as it turns out, Torterra is a bum and a Hydro Cannon still did like 80% to it, so I was still able to win the game. But a ton of people ended up switching Jellicents into an up energy Feraligatr, thinking that at the very least, it is a wall to Feraligatr energy, and having Crunch set up some pretty nasty farm downs. Now back to the Magnezone. Jellicent plus Wigglytuff is kind of just the core to beat right now. You're either running it or you're trying to break it. That's part of why yesterday's team with the Shadow Venusaur ended up working, because Shadow Venusaur could continually break that Fairy plus Water core. Magnezone does the exact same thing. I'm very curious. Let me know down in the comments, how are you finding the start to this Open Grade League meta so far? For content's sake, I've been running a wide variety of teams in Pokemon, and I feel like there's a lot of Pokemon that have viability, which ends up leading to kind of a cool meta. I really appreciate that Pokemon like Marowak, Gastrodon, Bastiodon, and Scizor have dramatically fallen off in usage, as those were some Pokemon that were kind of annoying to face, and now I feel like there ends up being a lot more neutral play across the board, at least so far in my experience, which is something that I'm a pretty big fan of. Anyways, thank you guys so much for watching. If you enjoyed watching today's video, please do leave a like on it and subscribe to the channel if you have not. And an extra special thank you, as always, to our channel members here on YouTube. The support you guys provide is genuinely so appreciated. So thank you guys most very much. And until next time, I've been HomeSliceHenry.